Hello and welcome to the Flocode podcast, where we're dedicated to spreading the ideals of open source development, community collaboration, and engineering innovation. I'm your host, James O'Reilly, a civil structural engineer based in Vancouver, BC, Canada. Our mission is to empower engineers across the globe through a multi-dimensional approach to learning. We dive deep into technical topics, especially Python's potential in civil and structural engineering, alongside broader engineering-focused subjects like soft skills, economics, science, modern technologies, and industry trends. I'm extremely passionate about Python's application in our field, but I want to emphasize that Flocode's overarching goal is about fostering growth and continuous improvement. So we talk about a lot more than Python on this podcast. Check out the Flocode newsletter on Substack for more. The links are all in the description. And with that said, let's dive into today's episode. Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of the Flocode Engineering Insights podcast. Today I got Mr. Tim Rawlings from CalcTree. How you doing, Tim? Welcome aboard.
Good, thanks James. How you going, mate?
Not too bad. And up front, I just want to explain to everybody that Tim works at CalcTree. I don't have any commercial dealings with CalcTree. This is really just a platform that I found myself that I thought was cool. So I reached out to Tim and I thought that we could have an interesting discussion about the kind of work that he's doing there. So that's what this episode is going to be about. And we're going to talk about CalcTree. We're going to talk about Tim's perspectives on engineering. And we're going to talk about whatever we feel like. And I'll leave it there. Tim, give us a brief intro on your story, where you started, where you went to school, what sort of engineering work you did before you went to CalcTree, and how it all got going.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Aussie-based, live in Melbourne, born and bred down under, and I did my studies at Melbourne Uni. Where I live, I did engineering and commerce. So I actually started my career with a bit of a jaunt in management consulting, doing like digital strategy stuff at Accenture. Didn't like that, so jumped ship and decided to give engineering a go. So I jumped from there to Arup, where I started as a structural engineering grad. So first ever job was a revamp an existing building of one of the old buildings in Melbourne. Sort of a lot of interface work with steel and RC, a lot of PT beams to support existing structure, that kind of stuff. Then just had a string of like steel tower jobs, which
all Australian jobs?
All in Australia, in Melbourne, a bit in Sydney. And then after about, I think 3 years at Arup, I sort of got really, through that process, I got really into computational design in a steel context. So working with the like ETABS and Grasshopper Rhino and building out those kind of workflows to design steel better internally, our teams at Arup. And that kind of ended up getting me seconded to the Hong Kong office, where I went over there to do steel jobs for work that they'd won in Korea, but then ended up doing RC in Macau because that's just like the way the projects worked. Worked in Hong Kong, doing that for a year or so as well. Mm-hmm. Then back to Melbourne, sort of working between Melbourne and Sydney in like 2018-19, and then COVID hit. I was in Melbourne, and if anyone was paying attention to the sort of global lockdowns Melbourne had, I think the longest lockdown in the world. That's right. Which was wild. It's a pretty surreal experience. So I was working on what jobs we had. I think all the work we were getting was like data centers in Melbourne at the time. There wasn't sort of anything. I mean, they're actually pretty cool projects, to be honest, from an engineering perspective, but they weren't like sexy projects. So I was working on that for like 2 years whilst in lockdown. And it's around then that I started getting into like sort of doing some side gigs and side projects. Actually doing like data analytics. So back to more the kind of management consulting kind of stuff. Started up a little side gig with a friend of mine. Worked on that for probably a year, and then that's kind of when I realized that was sort of the pivotal point where I was like, okay, I definitely want to go down that track. but my skill set is in engineering, not so much in like data analytics. So then it was then that I started like gearing up to try and see how I could get into the world of startups and construction tech. Sort of scope out the different ways to do it, in terms of like getting funding and like working with investors or just like going for it. That was basically end of 2021 is when I like fully jumped ship and committed to the startup live. And then like a few months after that started like met co-founders and started CalcTree.
Cool. And so all the steel stuff that you did at Arup, was that the entire structure, like from the foundations up?
So we would do, so typically it would be, you would have your standard kind of RC piles or raft on the projects I worked on at least. And then in Australia, it's always, not always, but most of the time it's an RC core. And then nowadays it's more and more precast RC cores. Yeah. And then you have steel composite decking, columns, and then lateral systems. I ended up, one of the early jobs I did was actually a New Zealand-based job. And also we were doing in Christchurch, actually. So we were doing a lot of like pretty hardcore lateral stability, steel lateral stability systems on those projects. And that kind of, like I found myself getting on those kinds of jobs in Melbourne when we were having like steel bracing systems and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I was getting into, and like everything from member design through to actual like trying to automate and automate like from concept through to drawings, the connections as well for those sorts of systems. Which is,
like large tower buildings are their own animal in terms of like engineering design. There's just so much different stuff going on there. My background's heavy civil, so I don't really deal with that kind of stuff, but it's very interesting, like, and a totally different branch of the tree. So in your own words, I guess, how would you describe CalcTree to somebody that's never heard of it? What is it?
So CalcTree, I guess the headline would be a productivity app for engineers in the construction industry. So, and to put it in, that's kind of like the high level headline. To put it in like tech terms, if you've ever used Notion before and GitHub before, it's kind of like a meshing together of those two, but geared towards users who work with tools like Excel, Python, and 3D models and CAD and that kind of stuff. Primary use case right now is effectively to take calculation tools or calculation apps and workflows that have been built in spreadsheets and or Python, and then we provide a way to take them, put them in the cloud, drive them from our UI anywhere on the web, or via API.
Cool. I noticed a lot of the stylistic similarities to Notion, and I love Notion. I think it's extremely convenient tool how it works, and I've tried a few of those different tools. I don't know if you've ever tried Obsidian or some of those mind mapping ones. They're also cool, but Notion has been the one that I've stuck with, and it's the easiest one that I can organize and link stuff together. So I saw a lot of similarities with how CalcTree's like laid out.
Yeah,
I like that.
Yeah, we definitely in the early days, and it's stuck with the UI, have drawn inspiration from Notion, and like, we use it internally for all our sort of productivity stuff. And yeah, it's just simple, it's easy to pick up, and it's certain parts of it are just awesome. So we're like, well, if it's not broken, let's not fix it. Let's just like draw inspiration from it and build that into CalcTree. I think we're at the point now where, like, with new integrations and sort of Python libraries that we're bringing into the app and the certain functionalities that we're going to be bringing in over the next 6 to 12 months, like there will be a divergence away from Python, in the sense that it will sort of get much more technical. Like there'll be many more technical elements in the platform, and also
do you mean technical from like the architecture of the actual of CalcTree itself, or do you mean technical from like engineering content perspective?
From like engineering content and like features in the application. So for example, right now it's not like haven't set pages up to handle large data sets well, or any data sets well, to be completely honest. And so that's one thing that we're working really hard on. And to do that, there will be certain UI changes and certain features that we bring in, which will make our pages look much more like towards like MathCAD, but not their UI, but in terms of like the features and stuff on the page. But still trying to maintain the kind of user friendliness and simplicity of Notion.
It seems like now, if you have a data set for whatever it is, it's like maybe it's an Excel file or a CSV file, and that's kind of how CalcTree works right now. But are you saying that you're kind of want to move towards maybe like larger SQL databases or something like that?
Not, at least not anytime soon that large, but more. So right now, like if you upload a spreadsheet to CalcTree, you can map the table. And then so you have a table element, which has all that types of data content in it. But it's not easy to use, and it's not easy to realize on pages, and it's not easy to feed into Python. Whereas what we want to do, the way we want to go is kind of introduce like things like data frames and pandas and that kind of thing, and allow those two different elements like tables from Excel or data frames in Python to talk to each other easier, and also like native tables in CalcTree. So we're hearing that loud and clear from users that that's definitely a missing link right now, and so we're putting in sort of, I guess, like research and prototyping stage for those features now.
Cool. Yeah. And you can stop me here if I'm wrong, because I'm not an expert. I've just cruised around the site a little bit, but it seems to me as though you guys are building a pretty substantial collection of calculations for different design codes around the world, and users can get in there and they can kind of clone each one of those calculations to their own account, and then they can manipulate them, add, edit, share, whatever. That's really cool. And I guess that's kind of what you mean by when you say it's kind of like a GitHub vibe, where people can post these calculations, and you've got I saw multiple different design standards in there, which is really cool. And you have the bounty program. Explain that. I thought that was really cool.
So our vision for the platform is, since day dot, was to actually have a marketplace in it, or if not a marketplace, like enable creators other than us to build calculations and share them with their network. Like you can kind of see that function happening. Like if you look at LinkedIn, like there's so many people doing like making really awesome little apps or little calculations, and they'll share them through like a screen recording or a screenshot. And so what we've wanted to do since day one is harness that kind of energy, but provide a platform where it's easier to share like an actual functioning calculation. So we've been working on how can we create CalcTree in a way that enables that, and a part of and sort of gets us to the end destination of this marketplace kind of concept. Where we started was we had sort of just internal staff dog feeding the platform and building this content. But then we realized, well, actually, there's nothing stopping us harnessing that energy right now. We're just sort of limited on the features in the platform that enrich it. So we started this bounty program, I think, Q4 last year. I think it was like November, something like that, where basically we say, there's all these calculations that we're hearing from the market that you guys want. Let's build them together. And so we'll basically have this big list of calculations that people can build, and each of them is sort of a negotiable fee. So we're actually pay for creators to build that piece of content on our platform. And it serves a few purposes. One, it helps us further dog feed the platform and get external user insight on how the platform experience is. Two, it allows us to build up this library. And three, it provides, we're actually seeing some of these creators take those calculations, promote it on their own social media, their own networks. And so it's starting to prove out this concept we have around like marketplace and network effects, around sharing and virality of tools, which is really, really quite exciting. So it's sort of like the V0 of eventually a marketplace that we have to build.
Interesting. And so regarding the user base, when did you guys were still in beta, is that right?
Yeah.
So what does that mean? Because I think I've got full access to everything as a beta user. Yeah. And this is what a sort of a data collection period for you guys to sort of straighten things out and figure things out.
Yeah, so we still see it as I mean, at the end of the day, like, I don't think we'll ever be finished building. There's so much we want to do, and there's so many ways we could take the platform that there'll always be something new that we want to build. But right now, like, we feel that a lot of the core infrastructure, it's still not to the level we would want to fully say, yeah, it's like finished or it's ready. So we're keeping the platform in beta, and anyone can sign up and use it. Additionally, in terms of free usage, so our intent is to have a freemium model. So rather than like what the normal industry is right now is that you'll get like a free trial period. And so it's like, okay, you can sign up and you can use the platform for a couple of weeks for free, but then you got to pay. We're not going to take that approach. We're going to take more of like a Spotify-esque approach where you can actually use the app endlessly, except if you don't sign up and have a paid subscription, you get ads or you have limited features. You can't use all your playlists or whatever it is. So our intent with CalcTree is to have it always free at some base level, but certain features that we introduce, certain limitations around sort of storage or amount of team members in a workplace, those kind of features will be like on a paid plan. But anyone will always be able to sign up and use the platform for free. That's sort of aligned with how we want to grow the business. It's also aligned with how we want to partake in the community as well. I don't think it's like, we believe that it restricts community growth and virality by having like a paywall after a certain amount of time. Better just let everyone use it as much as they want, but then put limits where it makes sense. For features that cost us more to develop or to maintain the back end for or whatever. Charge a fee for that.
You've raised an interesting question, like in terms of the product, the direction of the product. Like, how do you balance what the users, like, how much advice do you take from the user base versus what it is you think you want to build?
Yeah,
like there's a fine line there. How are you guys managing that?
So from the get-go, like, it was very founder driven in terms of the vision of what we wanted to build. And we were kind of just sort of trying to get the platform to the level where it was appealing enough to the market so that people would use it, not necessarily finished, but appealing enough so that we could start to get some traction. And then the moment that started to happen, which in earnest was probably started like late last year when we started having people sign up and actually use it. From there, then it's like, we're really, like, one of our main priorities at the moment is getting insight from users. So we are just trying to suck up as much information as possible. We have product analytics, which like sort of does a lot of tracking and gives us some quantitative metrics around it. But really where the gold is in terms of getting insight, it's like having meetings, having Slack conversations with people who join our community, and just trying to get as much qualitative data as possible about how people find the experience with CalcTree, what their expectation is with the platform versus what the reality is. Then you end up with this like bucket load of sort of little notes and tidbits of information. And then we as a product team internally try and synthesize that and disseminate that into a series of priorities around what features we're going to build and that kind of stuff. Yeah. So that's very much a challenge. I think just given the way that we built it in the past, we were heavy on sort of founder vision to drive the product direction, but now we're still like in this process of pivoting to user and market insight to drive the direction, and we've probably still got a bit more ways to go with drawing that insight and using it to drive the direction, but that's where we're headed with that.
Yeah, it's very tricky to figure out exactly what to prioritize, especially like you said, there's so many directions that you could take this thing in. And I saw too, as part of the bounty program thing, there was like a priority or a demand level for certain calculations.
Yeah.
Whereas maybe like a simple calculation, lots of people have submitted one. There's a lot of different versions of it, but maybe there's some specific wind calculation in some code that's in high demand. So I thought that was quite kind of interesting that people have been asking for that kind of stuff. What would you say has been the biggest challenge to date with building CalcTree?
So I think, well, number one, I think at the start, like, I personally was really green with building a software. So I think the complexity of what we wanted to build, like the platform where it's at now, it's like quite a lot of moving parts and pieces. Like even just having like a Python and an Excel engine in the application is like, that's pretty wild. But like 2 years ago, I was kind of like, oh yeah, that seems like a relatively simple thing to build. Like, let's do it. So I think dealing with the complexity and coming to terms with the complexity, and then within that sort of new landscape, prioritizing what to build, that's been a real challenge. And as a team, not only kind of just like dealing with it conceptually, but then actually like implementing it in our processes, that's an ongoing battle, and it's definitely quite difficult. Another big challenge was raising capital in 2022. So it's interesting. We started at the end of 2021. 2023 was when it was really hard. 2021 and 2022, like we were actually, it wasn't too bad to raise capital, given the stage we're at and given where the market was. But post Silicon Valley Bank collapse, like the whole investor market kind of went risk off. And so we were headed into trying to raise capital at that point. And then that just became like, we ended up successfully closing the round and oversubscribing, but it was definitely like a mission, and it took a long time. And a lot of investors who would normally be interested sort of pulled out through to reasons like out of our control. So that was challenging. The other one is, so we're a fully remote company. So I'm in Melbourne, one co-founder's in Sydney. A lot of our staff are in Queensland, and we're kind of all over the place. So we're fully remote.
How many people do you have on the CalcTree team?
We have 12 full-timers at the moment. And then sort of we always have some interns in, and also like a range of contractors working across like analytics or different bits and pieces of the business. And then we also have bounty creators as well, who are sort of more community members, where we kind of treat them as part of the core team. We find that's kind of the best way to get insight from them and get the best results from their tools. So 12 full-time, and then it kind of up to 20 people in our Slack and like working on different parts of the business at different times.
Sorry, go ahead, Tim.
I was just going to say, like that's the other big challenge is like building a fully remote company, especially like for myself coming from like a pretty corporate environment in physical office and that kind of stuff, like switching to fully digital and then trying to build a culture and a team in this environment. It's been a challenge for everyone who went through COVID and switched, but for us, it's kind of like, that's our reality now, always. So building on that is a challenge.
That's kind of, I don't know what I think about that. It's like it's become more normalized. Like I still come to the office most of the time, but I feel like the biggest disadvantage of the remote work thing is for junior staff and for people that are coming in fresh that don't know anybody or they don't have much experience. It's impossible essentially to soak stuff up when you're at home logging in. And I spent plenty of time in my junior years goofing off because there's nobody watching over my shoulder, and I can only imagine how useless I would be if I got that opportunity again.
It's
probably shouldn't be admitting that, but that's the truth.
No, I mean it's the reality. Like when you're at home and or wherever you are, and there's not a manager sitting a couple of desks away, it's kind of like, oh yeah, I will do some personal admin or whatever it is. We do what we can with like building a team culture, and then using that as a mechanism to like assign accountability and get engagement. And that goes hand in hand with like a pretty flexible kind of scheduling. We've got staff in different time zones, and so it's kind of like a flexible living organism. And I think within that, it's just trying to like get some process and system in place to like avoid someone coming and being like, I don't know what I'm doing and all that. So it's a constant balancing act. And I feel that we're getting pretty good at it, and it's almost becoming like a competitive advantage for us. Compared to like in office companies was in a physical place. But it's
And it's just a normal thing now. It's like, there's pros and cons to both situations, so you just roll with it. And
yeah,
yeah, it's cool. Um, Regarding, we spoke briefly last week about Python in engineering and just about how tricky it is to explain the benefits of Python.
yeah.
Um, what's your experience on that front? Just like why did you even start using Python for engineering, and what was kind of the reactions and that kind of stuff?
It's a really good question. So I guess maybe as a start point, like explaining a bit about how I see the kind of reasons people don't use it, and then I can talk to like kind of my experience with like figuring it out, teaching myself it, and then using it in a work environment. So I kind of see it like for a typical engineer, they've kind of got this. They've always got like a short to medium term priority, which is delivering a project. And to pick up a new tool, whether it be Python or like anything, there's a time factor there where you have to give away some of your short-term time to learn that new tool. And what I find I've found in the past is that even if that new tool might increase that individual's efficiency by 25 to 50% or whatever it is, like that's not enough, and that long-term benefit isn't enough to convince them to give away some of their short-term time to learn that thing. So for me in particular, like I was kind of lucky. I mentioned I kind of worked in digital strategy consulting for a bit, and then through that got pretty into analytics, just like pure data analytics, not really applied to engineering. And through that process, I kind of taught myself Python in that context. Then when I got to Arup, I was really lucky. Like a manager I had at Arup early on, like threw me into Grasshopper and was like, "Hey, I'm going to give you a week to just figure out how to build a Grasshopper script." And the challenge was to optimize a truss using Grasshopper. And then so like I had a bit of free air to learn Grasshopper in that environment as a grad with like pretty low consequence. Then from there, kind of joined the dots with my experience with Python, and then try to bring that into Grasshopper, and just took my time to trial and error. Learn. Additionally, within Arup, like there was like a network, like an underbelly of like digital people who were doing anything from Grasshopper scripts through to like building like stuff on .NET and stuff like this. But then also Python was kind of like the quick moving thing that everyone was jumping onto. So being able to get involved in that community within the company and like leverage each other's scripts and tooling that we sort of built, in the form of like emailing stuff to each other and this sort of thing, really allowed me to up my skills quickly, because I could just pick up someone else's like super applied computational script, and super applied in the sense that it's like designing like a base plate for a really specific column shape, something which you just never find like out in the wild if you're doing this thing by yourself, or trying to find it online. But yeah, being able to pick that up and sort of just to decipher it and figure it out, that really helped me learn quite quickly, which was really cool.
Yeah, that is cool. I mean, the way you describe that is you had a few like, fortuitous circumstances that kind of gave you the bones of learning Python. And I agree, it's the big issue, like, because I bounced off it a couple of times earlier in my career, and I was just like, man, I'm so shit at this. Like, why would I do this when I can do it so much faster with other tools? And it took a while to get over that hump. But once I did, and once I had that momentum of reaching my proficiency in Excel, then it was all plain sailing, then like a flywheel.
Yeah, exactly. I think the other big part of like helping you get over that hump is like forcing a deliverable on yourself in a way. Like if you say, like, if you put yourself in a position where you have to solve this thing and you have to use Python to do it, then like you will figure it out. And then that kind of gets you over that hump. So I think that's another way that helped me right at the start with that. It was like I had a manager being like, hey, like you need to do this and you have to use Grasshopper to do it. okay, and then I had to figure it out. And maybe it wasn't perfect, but if you get the momentum going, you kick off the flywheel. And yeah, same again with Python, like just having some applied situation wherein you're using it, it gets you there. And then you're rolling from there.
Yeah, I do see like the last couple, especially the last year, I've seen so much more discussion and interest about Python in the
Yeah,
engineering space, and way more people are starting to talk. I think it's because AI is now just everywhere,
yeah,
and it's so much more accessible, and everyone's talking about parametric design and computational design, and there's still a lot of resistance. There's still a lot of people that say
yeah,
there's always somebody that just wants to turn it into a software engineering situation. But I don't think so. I think there's just so much utility in Python.
yeah.
And now with these, like, do you use AI much in your own work to help you check code or test stuff out?
Yeah, so we use it. So for a lot of the content that we build, like not a lot of it, but not like all of it, but definitely a decent proportion. Like one of the first steps will be ChatGPT, build me some Python script to do blah, and then like okay,
Yeah.
you get the basics, and then you bring that into CalcTree, and then you start from there. It gives you that basis. So that, I mean, I also use it for a lot of like I sort of do a lot of like operational stuff in CalcTree, and figuring out like what an accountant's saying to me or what a lawyer is saying to me.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
find ChatGPT is super useful for that. And yeah, we got like a pro account and encourage our employees to use it as well. In the tech team in particular, they use the GitHub Pro. Oh, what is it? Microsoft's
Copilot.
Copilot, yeah. To help like troubleshoot code and all that kind of stuff as well. And yeah, it's super useful.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it's only a matter of time before like there's more specific AIs for engineering contexts. It's inevitable. Currently, GPT is kind of limited with how much it can help you like decipher a code or understand like eTabs output or whatever it is. But I think that's coming for sure.
Yeah, and it is like you say. I use it a lot for stuff like that as well. To, I'll start with it to conceptualize or to like ideate or to
Yeah,
get some bullet points together, or like it just helps my brain and it gives me a lot more additional space to do things. And I've been experimenting a little bit with Google Gemini's newer model as well, which is pretty good. And even more recently, today I was playing around with the open source models from Meta, the
oh
new
yeah,
Llama models,
yeah,
and it's amazing how good those models are. And it's running on my laptop,
yeah.
and
It's wild.
it's totally free, and you can upload your own documentation and query that documentation. And I mean, it's not, you're not going to write a research paper with it, but it is very, very impressive. And you're right. I think that these tools are coming, and people that are sleeping on these tools, they're going to wake up one day and be like, what the hell is going on?
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know?
definitely. I mean, I feel like a lot of people had that moment like a year ago or whatever when they released the first ChatGPT, or probably not the first, but like the first time it went like viral, right? I
Yeah.
think a lot of people were like, "Holy crap! Like this is insane," And then I think it's going to that like that experience is going to happen for more and more like niches within the industry. It's like all of a sudden there's some AI model writing calculation reports or spec reports and this kind of stuff. It's like, oh crap, like wow. And
Yeah.
then that's when, but at that point, it's like, well, you have to get on board and just start using it. And if you're like a technologist trying to build something, you've missed the boat. Like it's
Yeah.
moving so fast that if you're not in it now, in terms of like building, you're behind.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. And even just aside from the technical stuff, but all of the philosophical questions about true AI, it is a really interesting topic. Um, do you see any space in CalcTree for some sort of AI support, or what are you guys thinking about anything
Yeah.
like that?
So we've been experimenting with it for 6 months or probably since mid last year. Basically, we've been experimenting with how we could use it in the platform. One obvious way, which I kind of already hinted at, was, well, it's pretty good at writing Python scripts. Kind of porting that over and like really just like an API call from CalcTree to ChatGPT to help write the script is one thing that we've been looking at. Another big one is that code information, like building code information and all that kind of like navigating those documents right now is like, that's like a really pointy pain point that users experience. Not just CalcTree, just engineers in general. Like,
Yep.
You know, you've got to find some clause for some specific issue you got, like could take you 20 minutes.
Yep.
So we're really interested in how could we work with these code providers to provide a way to better access their data in CalcTree and actually apply it to a live calculation at the time. So that's another area that we're exploring, which is definitely like long range, and it's really not a critical path for us right now, given like all the other stuff that we're going on. But it's definitely like a really interesting area that we're looking at for sure.
That's like what you just described, I think, is sort of the $1 billion question right now for so many industries. Like everybody wants a private trained model on their proprietary data. You know, think of like every industry, they could leverage that. It would be just so valuable. And, you know, we've been trying to do it here internally where we've been experimenting with trying to train models on past reports and stuff like that. Because we do a lot of specialized hydropower work and pump storage hydro work. And there's a lot of really good information in older reports. And if we were able to train a model on that stuff, it's very, very helpful. But, you know, I went rogue here one day trying to do it, and I had it connected to my personal OpenAI account, and I was like processing these old PDFs and had no idea that it was just gunning my credit card on OpenAI. So I ended up running it for hours, and something like $200 worth of processing fees on my credit card.
I did that with I was using it in like a Google Sheet. There's like a plugin for Google Sheets where you can basically run a GPT call in a cell. And so it's dangerous, right? Because the moment you set it up, if you drag that formula, like that's how many calls you're running. And I can't remember what I was doing, but it was like 1,000 rows or something. And I just like double clicked the cell, and it was like, call GPT, run this prompt. And I was like, oh, this is taking a while to run. Like, what about, oh, Jesus, I've got, this is running GPT prompts. And then I looked at our open AI account. I'm like, oh man, I've just spent our monthly allowance on that.
Yeah. But it's fascinating stuff, and I think you're right. I think, you know, there's a lot of people working on the same thing, and it's coming. Like there's going to be an enterprise version of it, whether it's OpenAI or whoever. Someone's going to come out with an enterprise version of this, and it's just going to be like, you know, query your own Google Drive or whatever, and find all your information inside of a sandbox where it's protected.
You know, and like, so something like CalcTree, like if our vision is proven right and we have teams and groups of engineers building shared content in a workspace, then like obviously we would explore figuring out, you know, some sort of AI mechanism to help navigate that data. So at least, you know, then the value or the sell from us is like, well, if you're building content in CalcTree, like all of a sudden it's now part of an AI model that you can access and tap, and that's also linked to like code information or whatever it is. So you can really start to get some pretty cool stuff as you start to stick the modules together as well.
Yeah, it's exciting, man. What you're doing there is exciting. So tell me about the growth and the user base over. Well, when did you guys essentially go live with your first users?
Yeah, so we had like super test users, like friendlies, testing since like, you know, the moment we got something live, which was like 3 to 6 months in. But then we didn't kind of pull the covers off and just leave it open until I think it was July last year. And that's where it was effectively an alpha at that point. And then that's when we started having users come in. It was pretty slow at the start, to be honest. Like we've been really quiet on comms. We weren't promoting it or anything. We kind of just did like a quiet launch, let it go. But we found that like our growth mechanism, like the way we want to scale users, is through SEO and product-led growth. And so at that point in time, our SEO process wasn't firing. Like it was working, but it was kind of still in the infancy. But what we found over the last 6 months is that SEO has really picked up. So people are finding CalcTree organically through just looking for a calculator on one of the many ones we have in our libraries. And we're starting to see like actually kind of decent conversion from that SEO growth into users on CalcTree. So that's kind of how we're starting to scale the business, which that's another way with like, I think we're pretty different to other existing tools in the construction tech space. They're always closed off, like they're behind a paywall effectively.
Totally.
Whereas we're just like super open. We're like, okay, we're going to build all this content, and like, yeah, it's cost us a bit, but we put it up for free, and then all of a sudden people start to come, and if it's valuable content, they start to come, they start to use it, they check out CalcTree, they're like, a lot of the time they're like, it's clever, but sometimes they sign up and then they become an early user. But that's the stage we're at. So I feel like the top of the funnel there is really actually starting to work, and our theory, like our vision around and theorizing around, will SEO work in this context, has actually been proven true, which is awesome. The next phase, like the kind of mid part of the funnel, which is where it's like, okay, you get onto CalcTree, you have your onboarding experience, you start to use the platform, and then you find features that are really sticky. That's the part we're still like optimizing and trying to get users to come back, and like providing a comprehensive enough feature set that they see value in it and will use it in their day-to-day. That's kind of like the point we're at now. And all that user feedback that I mentioned before that we're trying to gather, that's like our primary question is like, how do we get this more sticky? How do we get people to stick around more? Like, how do we make it more like a, wow, this is awesome kind of experience the moment you sign up?
Yeah. That's interesting. Like when I think about like you mentioned, some of the other structural calculation packages or services that are out there right now, that was actually, I had a difficult experience with one of them with licensing. We had a big problem where we couldn't get a license freed up to get into our calculations, and
I see.
we were delayed for a couple of weeks, and we looked like assholes to the client. And I was so frustrated by the process that that's when I started going even more heavily into sort of open source tools and trying to develop my own stuff more, so I could stop having to rely on, because often even not just like calculation tools, but also finite element packages and stuff like that. I would have to like text somebody and be like, hey, have you got SAP open? And they're like, oh, I left it open. I just left. Like, and then it's like, gotta wait till tomorrow morning, that kind of stuff.
We had, I remember it was it was ETABS that we had, but we had like shared floating licenses across all the APAC region. It's like Melbourne, Sydney, Singapore, New Zealand offices, and there was like 5 licenses or something because they're bloody expensive. So I was like, fair enough. But, like, Christ almighty, like, you're trying to deliver something quickly for a client, and someone's just got some analysis running overnight somewhere, and too bad. You got no choice.
And it's like, can I just have it for like 15 minutes, and then I'll go, and then they're on a call, and it's just it's tough going.
And then once you get one, you never give it back because you're like,
people. It's all part of it, man. And I think that's probably the same in most engineering firms around the world. But I think that's one of the big selling points of Python and of some of these open source tools. And I think a lot of these, you're always going to need like the giants of the industry that have these like super advanced finite element programs. Like you can't compete. Like you try to build your own version of ETABS, you'll be working on it for 50 years. But
and
it's
then
just too big.
And it still won't be like in some countries, like in Hong Kong, for example. Like I ran into this wall where there's actually like the government approved or like regulator approved bits of software, and so
really,
in some countries, so they won't even let you use, like, for your analysis package, they won't even let you use something that's custom built. Like it has to be like an approved thing. So I think that's probably like a smaller part of the market from a global perspective, but still like just another headwind and another barrier to entry for the open source tooling. And so, looking forward, it's like, well, I don't think anything is going to really replace like something like an ETABS, but what we'll hopefully see is like an evolution of their product to cloud. So they take all the good stuff that's in the back end, like in their finite analysis, finite element models, but package it up in a way that can scale like something like CalcTree. Hopefully that's where it heads.
Yeah. And I do think like what you're proposing of like, being more open and letting people use it and sort of organic word of mouth usage. Like, I think that is the next generation of engineering services. And, the younger generation that are coming up now, they know the power of virality and the power of just, collaboration and being able to stuff like GitHub. Like if you've got a beam calculation and it's on GitHub, like why not put it up there and like help people out? And that's a big part of what I'm working on with the Flocode stuff. And it's still early days now, but it is encouraging that a lot of people are interested in it. And but there's definitely a divide, like there's definitely an apparent age gap.
100%. Yeah, it's interesting. I think another big part of that gap or distinction between the gap is like the expectation of tooling. Like I felt it a bit, but like I hear it really strongly, potently from like fresh graduates now that like you're used to using like Netflix, Spotify, like whatever app, and it's amazing. It works on your phone, it works on your computer, iPad, whatever. And then you get into work and you go to open up like Strand 7 or something. Strand 7 is great software, like not having to go, but like, geez, like the UI and the experience with it, it's like you're stepping into another century, like literally.
Yeah,
in some cases.
It's true.
And
true.
And so you're starting to get, as like those more junior.
You're gonna get a cease and desist letter from Strand after this.
Yeah, possibly. I love Strand. There's many a building with it, I swear, but it's it's UI. It's
no, you're right.
But there's expectation that new software coming out in our space is like to that level, and like that's the level that we try to build CalcTree to. It's like obviously Notion and those tools are freaking amazing, and they've got hundreds of engineers focusing on the UI, and we're not going to get to that point, but something in that line where like a more sort of like 0 to 10 year kind of level experience engineer will look and be like, oh yeah, this feels familiar from like my personal life. I think that's really important, and we'll start to see more of that in the industry as well.
Yeah. So we're running out of time here. So a couple more topics that I want to cover before we finish up. We could keep going for a long time here, but what is your advice for people out there like on the fence or kind of struggling with Python? What would you say to them about trying to pick it up?
I think the first thing is to try and like pinpoint where your difficulty is. Like if you're struggling because you don't know, like you don't have a framework for how you should progress through learning, then I guarantee there's some resource out online which has like a curriculum for learning Python, or there's like a YouTube playlist somewhere which sort of goes through a series of basics. So if that's the kind of like the point where you're like, I don't even know where to start and how to progress, then jump online and you can find something. I think if you're at the next stage where you've got these kind of different concepts, but it's kind of theoretical in a way, and you're kind of struggling like, how do I actually apply this? How do I string this together into something real and actually get some benefit out of it? And I think that's kind of like the hump we were talking about, like the big barrier. Then I would say throw yourself in the deep end on some kind of challenge. Like put yourself in a situation where you have to put all that stuff together and build something to do your job or to complete whatever it is, and you put enough time into it, you will get there. So I think that's the other piece of advice. I think the other big one is also join a community. I mentioned earlier that like within Arup, I was lucky, like there's like an email list that I could jump onto and lunch and learns that we could go to, and boom, you kind of got a community of friendly faces of people going through the same thing. If your company doesn't have that or you're on your own, like they exist online, like selfish a selfless plug, like we have a community in CalcTree where we have people join and they are learning CalcTree, but also Python at the same time. And just having someone in there in a Slack or whatever forum it is who can sort of jump on a comment, be like, oh, hey, try this or do that.
Yeah.
That's the best kind of help, because you could Google for hours and not find a solution to your specific situation. But you could ask a question, if someone's done it before, boom, that you got your answer right there. And I guess to stay on brand of our conversation, like ChatGPT is pretty damn good at code. So
yeah, especially to get you up and running and to ask like stupid questions. Like that's one of my favorite things about it is I can ask the stupidest questions and nobody's here. You know?
Yeah. 100%.
And I think everyone feels like that.
Yeah, and like the stupider the question, the more accurate their answer is going to be, because it's so obvious.
Yeah.
It's a great resource. But when you get into like more applied stuff and more like complex systems, I found ChatGPT actually becomes a hindrance, because you're kind of like asking it this stuff, and then it just starts feeding you not gibberish per se, but like it sort of jumps around with its answering. That's where like being in a community and having a person you can talk to or jump on a call is like, it's clutch. Like it makes all the difference.
There's many times where I've had some sort of like a coding problem, and it's given me like, you know, a wild goose chase where I'm doing crazy like backflips to try and make something work. Whereas if you just zoom out and had a more experienced look at the situation, it could be fixed in like a line or two, or some fundamental change that would would not need 20 lines of bullshit.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Okay, well, the final thing that I want to ask is, for people out there that are interested in CalcTree, you know, head to the website, obviously, but give them just a sort of a final lowdown on the kinds of stuff that you can do on there, and how you think that it can help them out with the various engineering fields out there.
For sure. So I think, you know, we've talked about it in different ways in this chat, but one of the biggest headwinds for people adopting Python is kind of like that startup, that pain to get started, the pain to like download it, install it, get an IDE for the first time. It's kind of like set up a virtual environment. Like that's very confusing. So probably my favorite feature with CalcTree is that you can sign up for free, start a new page, and immediately start writing Python code, and it will run. So I think for someone trying to get up and running with Python, for example, CalcTree is actually a really good way to do it, because it takes away a lot of the headache of that setup, but provides you an environment where you can link like Excel and more engineering focused tools than something like a Jupyter Notebooks, which is really, really broad. So yeah, from that, being able to quickly spin up a Python environment and then make it live and then share it and publish it as like an index page on Google, that I would say is the most exciting thing about the platform right now. As well as Python, you can do the same with an Excel spreadsheet. So say in your company or in your sort of repertoire of tools, you have your go-to spreadsheet, but you know, it's got many different copies and it becomes a bit of a mess. You can actually upload that to CalcTree, and similar to with what I mentioned with Python, that becomes like a cloud app, which you can reuse, share with someone else, collaborate on it, and publish it as a page that's indexed on Google as well.
Cool. All right. Well, check it out, everybody. It's pretty cool. And there's great documentation and tutorials on there. And I actually even saw some interesting stuff about like rules of thumb for, I don't know what it was. It was like portal frames or something like
design.
that. Yeah. That stuff's like, that's so handy to have things like that. So there's more stuff on there, guys. It's not just a calculation tool, but there is like more interesting engineering content on there as well. Okay, Tim, thank you very much for your time. It's a real pleasure to talk to you. And hopefully we talk again sometime in the future. And the very best of luck to you and everybody at CalcTree. And we'll see you in the next one.
Awesome. Thanks, James.
All right, buddy. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Flocode podcast. For deeper dives, please visit flocode.dev and make sure you're subscribed to our newsletter to stay in the loop on new content. And don't worry, we don't do spam. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. If you have thoughts, questions, or ideas, get in touch. I'm James O'Reilly. Keep innovating, and I'll see you in the next episode.